Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. Folks, I want to wish everyone for tomorrow a happy 4th of July, a happy 4th of July weekend, and not lose sight of the holiday as we join friends and family in backyard barbecues and family get-togethers. This is independence in our country, and we always remember that freedom is not free. I know it's a cliche, but we say it all the time. You know, folks, this Alec Baldwin case is finally going to trial. And what can we expect in Alec Baldwin's manslaughter trial? Does it matter that he's a Hollywood A-lister? Does that really matter when the death of this woman in the bottom right of this thumbnail you see, Halyna Hutchins, she lost her life? And the gentleman to the left, Joel Souza, with the same bullet that was fired that Alec Baldwin fired from that 45 caliber gun, went through the body of Halyna Hutchins and into Joel Souza's shoulder. You know, many broadcasters, many journalists, they report that somehow the gun just went off, and I think that's irresponsible journalism because it's already been stated numerous times by the FBI that gun could not have gone off if someone pulled the trigger. And granted, part of this whole case will be determined on the fact that it is the opinion of the FBI ballistics experts that Alec Baldwin did, in fact, pull that trigger, resulting in the death of Halyna Hutchins. But there's many other aspects to this case that we're going to go over with our expert panel. But again, this happened in October 21st, 2021. So we're at the 3-year mark, right? And many things have happened. Of course, Halyna Gutierrez-Reed, the armorer in this case, she was sentenced to 18 months in prison. And the same judge that sentenced Hannah Gutierrez-Reed to 18 months in prison is the same judge who is going to sit on this case. Her name is Judge Mary Marlowe Summer. And trust me, she does not play, and she will not be amused at a person or persons who do not take responsibility for their actions in this case. And provided if Alec Baldwin, and I'm not saying he is going to, if Alec Baldwin does get convicted, I think in the same way that she found the behavior of Hannah Gutierrez-Reed quite egregious, she will find in the same way toward Alec Baldwin, in the fact that he's never accepted his role in this, his responsibility in this, and from day one was in denial and was doing damage control from day one with his rich Hollywood friends, going on national TV shows talking about how innocent he was. Anyway, folks, hold on to your seats, hold on to your hats, hold on to your wigs, your children, your service dog or cat, whatever you have. You're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off-the-cuff zone, the police off-the-cuff zone. There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped in 10th and Ranch, Michael Biden.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger. Folks, we're going to get right into this. So let me introduce my esteemed guests right away. And my co-host this evening is retired NYPD Sergeant, professor at Albertus Magnus College in Connecticut, attorney, the always affable Professor Mike Geary. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, Billy, thank you for having me on. Welcome, everyone, to the show.
Always a pleasure. And we actually, the next guest, it's almost like people are asking me, you know where the body of Jimmy Hoffa is? I go, that's probably where Phil is. But anyway, we got retired NYPD detective, a crowd favorite. Welcome to the show, retired NYPD detective Phil Grimaldi. Welcome, Phil.
And you forgot Straight Out of Brooklyn. How you doing, Billy?
I
Hi,
forgot
Mike.
Straight Out of Brooklyn because I had so much on my mind that I couldn't remember the old the old introduction. Anyway, this New Mexico judge, Judge Mary Marlowe Summer, she ruled against the defense in a number of rulings that they were trying to get this case dismissed, and she wasn't having it. She was absolutely not having it. Mike, your thoughts?
Billy, she's a tough judge. She's doing what she has to do. She has to control the courtroom. She's got Alec Baldwin with money. He's going to have excellent attorneys. He's going to have that A-list defense attorneys, and they're making motions and they're spending money. And she wants this case over with. She wants it tried. She wants it tried now. And the last motion that she denied was the motion to quash the indictment and throw out the case because of the damage done to the firearm in question by the FBI. She ruled against him and said, we're going to have the trial anyway. Mr. Defense Attorney, you make up whatever you want, whatever complaints you want to make up. That's an appealable issue later on. But we're going to have the trial. We're going to have it now. And so get set. It's starting next Tuesday. She's a tough judge. She's got to be. It's her courtroom. Judges rule the courtroom. 100%.
You know, Mike, there's also got to be a lot of there's so much international interest, not just national interest and local interest, but Alec Baldwin is an international star. But when you think about justice, that shouldn't mean anything. But it does because he's got big bucks and he could pay for the expensive attorneys. They've already filed all kinds of motions that some lesser person may not have been able to afford to file. And they put this case off for a pretty long time. Phil, your thoughts?
Well, I got to agree with Mike. I like this judge. I think that she's going to be very fair in this case. And the fact that Alec Baldwin is a well-known actor, he's been in Hollywood for about, over 30 years or something, been in many, many motion pictures. He's a well-known actor. He's also well-known in the media for some of his antics. And I think that the judge is probably going to prescribe to the jury to put all of that aside. You're going to have to look at the evidence. When she gives the jury instruction at the end, after prosecution and defense has gone, she's going to probably go through that very, very cautiously and say, you have to leave your feelings about Alec Baldwin, if you do know who he is, which most people are going to know who he is. You're going to have to leave those feelings at the door. You're going to have to look at the evidence. If you like or dislike, there's some people that don't like Alec Baldwin, again, because of his media antics. He's got into screaming matches with reporters outside of his home and different things like that. I think he's even been arrested for some type of an assault. So with all of that said, the comes down to, we need a judge, and I think that this judge is very fair. When she sentenced Hannah Gutierrez Reed, I believe that she was pretty strict about it and saying that, even though you said you're sorry, doesn't seem like you've taken accountability for what happened. And let's face it, a young woman lost her life. Another person was shot. It's very, very tragic. That woman's husband doesn't have a wife anymore, and the little boy doesn't have a mother. So I think the judge is connecting with that, and I think that's the right thing. I would connect with that too if I were the judge.
Mike, one of the things, and I think if there was one word that could describe the Rust movie set, one word that could describe what the prosecution is going after in this case, and that one word is recklessness.
Yes, absolutely, 100%.
Would you elaborate, Mike? I didn't expect you to give me a four-word answer.
No, it's 100%. I'm agreeing with you. It's reckless. The term is reckless. The fact that it was Alec Baldwin was shooting this picture. He was shooting it for a low budget. He owned a production company. He was starring in it. He hired everybody. Ms. Gutierrez Reed is very, very young in the industry in terms of being an armorer. So he's in charge of everything. He's in charge of hiring everyone from A to Z. And he wants to get this done fast. I think the original shooting schedule was only 3 weeks long in New Mexico. So it was a very quick shoot. and there were complaints from people in the that were working on the film, doing all the little technical stuff that they have to do. They're all union employees, and they were complaining about not getting paid on time, not getting as much money as they were promised. There was, I think, two previous, or there was at least one previous incident on the set where a firearm went off or wasn't supposed to go off, something like that. It was a little chaotic, a little quick, a little reckless. He wanted to get this done. He wanted to get it done as fast as possible, save a few dollars, and he did not endear himself with all the people that were working on the film whatsoever, union employees, non-union employees, and fellow actors, and anyone else. Yeah, he was probably, as you can imagine, a little acerbic, domineering, but in the quickness of trying to get things done, safety protocols, which are standard in the industry, were definitely overlooked. You can't get around that. That was a reckless set.
I want to play the judge, and this is the judge that sentenced Halyna Hutchins, who happens to be the same judge who's going to sit on the Alec Baldwin case. Her name is Judge Mary Marlowe Summer. Let's see what she has to say here.
Alec Baldwin's trial didn't mince words towards the film's armorer before sentencing her to prison.
For all the fanfare and pundits and finger pointing that has been going on for over 2 years, we were able to seat a jury of her peers who confirmed they could listen to the evidence received in court and determine the facts and apply the law. They found Ms. Gutierrez guilty of involuntary manslaughter. What were some of the poignant facts that came out during the trial? In her police interview, she proudly owned her position as armorer. On October 21st, 2021, chaos ended after the film crew walked off. Ms. Hutchins and others were trying to rig, if you will, how they were going to keep filming. And what was the defendant doing while waiting? She was loading Alec Baldwin's gun. Did she have enough time to load the weapon safely? Plenty. Did she load the weapon? Yes. With dummies and a live round. Did she check what she was loading? No. Why? Well, in her own words, most recently, in her jail calls, she didn't need to be shaking the dummies all the time. Did she check after that? No. And while you've heard her concerns about how she'll never work again as an armorer leading up to the trial, have her concerns changed? No. Here's what she says. This whole thing has been a character attack on her. Just recently, in her allocution, I'm not a monster. And what was it done? They talk about how much of on the phone, she and another are talking about how much of Hannah's life that they could take up, and that this is messing up her modeling career. This is while she's incarcerated, waiting for a sentence. And what does she say about the death of Halyna? Hannah is dismissive of the judge talking about someone dying as a result of her actions. Hannah says she's looking at 13 months, which is ridiculous over what happened. Hannah says that people have accidents and people die. It's an unfortunate part of life, but it doesn't mean she should be in jail. A conditional discharge is not appropriate. And the second option of leaving you in the detention center would be giving you a pass you do not deserve. I did not hear you take accountability in your allocution. You said you were sorry. You were sorry, but not you were sorry for what you did. You were sorry for and hope they can find peace. It was your attorney that had to tell the court that you were remorseful.
It's unclear for now what fate lies for Alec Baldwin during his trial. What could more have been done from Baldwin's team to prevent the trial from happening?
I parallels between Halyna Hutchins' allocution and not accepting responsibility, and Alec Baldwin going on his infomercials after the shooting of Halyna Hutchins. And I could see this judge sitting in that same judge box in her black robes and saying, You are a disgrace. You went on national television and took no responsibility for, and that is providing he gets convicted. I'm not saying he's going to get convicted, but how is his behavior any different than Halyna Gutierrez Reed? In my mind, and in the mind of many people, and no matter how many times he says he didn't pull the trigger, science and the FBI investigation tells us he absolutely did pull the trigger. Phil.
Billy, I just want to piggyback a little bit about what Mike was saying. There were up to 15 safety standards in the industry that were violated. This wasn't the first time that someone was hurt with a firearm on the set of a movie. It had happened several times in the past. I think we know the cases. It was something that standards are put in place and they didn't follow them. They broke protocol in many, many respects. So no matter what Baldwin comes out with at trial with regard to a defense, they're going to look at that videotape that you're talking about where he went on with George Stephanopoulos.
Snuffleupagus, yeah.
Yeah, when he went on with him, he tried to play the victim, so to speak. He absolutely positively denies pulling the trigger. The FBI examination of that firearm stated that the only way that gun could have fired if the trigger was pulled. We did several shows on it. We did demonstrations. We had experts that talked about how the mechanism of the firearm works. And he's denying any type of accountability for himself. He's putting it on other people. And I think that she's pointing the finger at other people. She was just convicted. Now he's going to probably take the same stand and point the finger at, someone put the gun in my hand. How was I supposed to know it was loaded? Well, there's standards that say you're supposed to check it before you put it in your hand or have it physically checked. You're supposed to do a physical inspection of that firearm.
Phil,
she didn't do it and he didn't do it.
Phil, let me just interrupt you. What is drilled into our head at the range?
That's right.
Before you holster your weapon, do a physical and visual inspection of your weapon. So he was told by David Halls, first of all, the Halyna Gutierrez Reed loaded that gun. So she put the live round in there, and that was determined through a painstaking bit of investigation. She now gives the gun to David Halls. That's a violation of protocol right there. The armorer is the only one who's supposed to hand the gun to the actor.
Right.
Now the gun is it shouldn't be handed to the actor and said cold gun. It should be shown that it's a cold gun. Do a physical and a visual inspection of that firearm and show it to the actor.
And there's also an obligation from the actor. The actor is supposed to say, wait a second, I want to see what this gun is loaded with. He didn't follow that obligation. These are some of the safety standards and protocols that we talked about being violated. So I think he's got a very large hill to climb to get an acquittal in this case. I think there's going to be a lot of witnesses in this case. And if I were him, I would have my attorney speaking to the prosecutor about some type of a plea. Because I think
that's come and gone. That's over. The plea was offered. He turned it down. The prosecution pulled the plea back.
What was the plea? Do you know what the plea was, Billy? Was it a no jail plea? I'm sure it had to be a felony conviction. Was it a no jail, Mike?
No jail plea and a fine. And probation, same thing that like David Hall's got.
Yeah, I would feel comfortable with that. A felony conviction on his record, no jail time, and perhaps safety courses and a probation period. I would be comfortable with that. I mean, listen, I don't think that Alec Baldwin intentionally meant to harm Halyna Hutchins. I think that's really a gimme.
We're not even talking about intentional murder, intentional death, cause death. That's murder. Criminally negligently causing murder. No, there's no intent. You criminal negligently, through your negligence, cause another's death. And that's what we're talking about. That's what the law is talking about. Forbidden Planet from the chat. Alex's lawyer must have told him not to admit to anything. Forbidden Planet, he couldn't keep his ass off television, though.
Yeah, he couldn't shut up.
His lawyer said, shut up. But he had to be on TV as the narcissist he is, and extolling his innocence. No, dude, just keep your mouth shut, but no narcissist is able to keep their mouth shut because then they wouldn't be a narcissist. Mike?
Yeah, Billy, he didn't do himself any good by going on that Stephanopoulos interview. He thought maybe George Stephanopoulos would give him some lowball questions, easy ones that he could, real bunts. But the idea that he could say, I did not pull the trigger. What he should have said was, I don't remember pulling the trigger. I wasn't consciously trying to pull the trigger. And the fact that my finger twitched on the trigger was a complete accident. I never meant to hurt her. I am so sorry. If her family could forgive me, I'm a good person, and this was just a terrible, terrible tragedy. I'm owning up to it. I'm going to make it right by her family, however I can. That's what he should have said. We know, and if he had the least bit of any kind of rehearsals or any kind of training, it's always I remember at the range, 20 years going to the range in the NYPD. Safety, 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 safety. And if he had any sort of familiarity, he would have checked himself, and he would have realized that you have to be really careful. No matter what you think is that that's loaded in that cylinder, you have to be really careful. He didn't do himself any favors. And if the prosecution gets a chance to play that tape with Stephanopoulos, they'll do it.
Of course they're going to play it.
Yeah,
of course they're
that's a
going to
real-
play it.
Mike,
Yeah.
Mike, I have to disagree with you about what he should have said. He should have said nothing with regard to what happened.
No, you're 100% right.
He should have said
nothing.
the only thing he should have said was this. This was a horrible accident. My
Right.
heart goes out to the family. He should not have talked about anything to do with the day that this incident happened, whether he pulled the trigger. I would have not talked about that at all. All I would have said publicly was, I really have no comment until this matter finds its way through the system. My heart goes out to the family, and it was a horrible accident. It was a tragedy. That's what he should have stressed. If he starts getting into conversation regarding, I didn't pull the trigger, now he's going to be held accountable, because like Billy just said, they're going to show that videotape in court. And you can't have it both ways. When you have an FBI expert saying the only way that this gun could have gone off was if the trigger was pulled. But now you're on national TV with George Stephanopoulos saying, I absolutely positively did not pull the trigger. So he put himself kind of in the trick bag with that. I wouldn't have said anything.
Dumb. Yeah.
But Phil, the other thing is that every single journalist you read, whether it's the New York Times, any journalist, print journalist, they continue to say the gun somehow went off. No one would say he pulled the trigger. That's what happened. He pulled the damn trigger. Oh, the gun he was holding went off. No, it did not. He pulled the trigger. Stop. And they refuse to be honest. It's just, let me play a little bit of Law and Crime before I get my blood pressure goes up.
The Irish comes out.
Yeah.
Sides in this case, and their tensions are running high.
Baldwin is accused of involuntary manslaughter in the death of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins, but he says he never pulled the trigger.
It wasn't in the script for the trigger to be pulled.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
There it is. There it is right there. And that's, but again, his friend, how many of us could go on national television and extol the virtues of our innocence with a guy throwing beach balls to him, not even softballs, beach balls to him, and letting him tell his story on every national television station, and which again was a huge mistake.
That interview was years ago. So will Baldwin refresh his story and tell it to a new audience?
You run the risk of a jury saying, well, where does the line end? Where does the acting begin and where does the acting stop?
But that's not the only task Baldwin's defense now faces.
Baldwin's team has to make sure this jury understands, if they want to get an acquittal, the jury understands that a film set is not real life. A film set is unlike anything else that anyone has ever experienced before.
The trial comes months after the conviction of Rust armorer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, and experts say New Mexico prosecutors are still riding that high.
They know how to get a conviction in front of a Santa Fe County jury, and they know what facts work.
But that's not to say we won't see anything new.
This is really the prosecutor's chance to bring out everything that we haven't seen yet.
One thing's for sure, all eyes will be on New Mexico come next week.
And it's kind of a tortured history of this case.
To get a better idea of what to expect at Alec Baldwin's coming trial, We spoke with former prosecutor and defense attorney John Day. You're right there in New Mexico on the ground in Santa Fe. What is the reaction there at this coming trial that Alec Baldwin, an A-list celebrity, is going to be on trial?
Well, there's a lot of attention in this town being paid to it. New Mexico is a poor state, and so we have this film and TV program where the state kicks back tax credits to film productions, right? So Santa Fe is the scene of a lot of filming these days for the last couple of years. It's almost $1 billion that the film industry spends in New Mexico, and people are aware of what's going on. A lot of productions are shooting, a lot of Westerns are shooting. That's why Baldwin's production company came out here. They were shooting this relatively low budget Western film at a film ranch, one of these old West towns that's just a little bit out of town. It looks like an old West town that's been recreated, kind of like Disneyland, and they do a lot of productions there. So there's been a lot of attention paid to this because the film business in New Mexico is one of the few positive industries that we have, and the Baldwin shooting has garnered a ton of attention around town.
All this started on October 21st, 2021, when emergency responders were called to the Bonanza Creek Ranch in Santa Fe, New Mexico. At the time, the location was being used as a set for the low-budget Western movie Rust. The movie's producer and star, Alec Baldwin. It was between takes when rehearsing a scene that Baldwin's Colt .45 handgun went off. Cinematographer Halyna Hutchins.
She just said it too. She
said
just
it
said it was between takes. The gun went off. That gives him no culpability when you say the gun is the culprit here, not the person holding it.
And director Joel Souza were both shot. Souza's injuries were severe. The bullet had lodged in his spine, and he was taken from the set by an ambulance. He was treated at a Santa Fe hospital and survived, but the severity was much worse for Hutchins. The bullet had passed through her upper body, and she was in need of immediate care. Hutchins was airlifted to a trauma center in Albuquerque, where she later died.
I do have some very unfortunate news to tell you. She didn't make it. Yeah. So Joel's still at the hospital, but the other person involved didn't make it.
That was just the start of the controversy. In the months after the shooting, news broke about alleged negligence on the set. Before the deadly shooting, there had been 2 accidental firings of blank rounds, and several crew members had resigned out of safety concerns. The investigation soon zeroed in on Baldwin because he was holding the weapon, but also 24-year-old Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the movie's armorer. Reports noted that Gutierrez-Reed was inexperienced as an armorer, and prosecutors alleged negligence. The timeline of the case has a bit of a back and forth, with a switch of prosecutors in New Mexico, charges filed, dropped, and then filed once again. There was a bit of back and forth because after this happened way back in 2021, we weren't sure whether charges were going to be filed. Then they were dropped, then they were charged once again. So why do you think that prosecutors down in New Mexico really stuck with this involuntary manslaughter this time around?
But you've got to go back, and it's kind of a tortured history of this case. There was a DA involved, the elected district attorney in Santa Fe, and then she brought in a special prosecutor who then had to drop out because she was running for office. And then they brought in new special prosecutors. So it's been a bit of a mess getting to this point in the prosecution. But at the end of the day, the theory seems to be by all the different prosecutors on this case that in New Mexico, if you're handling a gun, that's a real gun, you are responsible for what comes out of the end of the barrel. You are responsible for knowing what's in there. And so their theory seems to be, doesn't matter if it was a film set, it doesn't matter what the circumstances were. This was a real gun, and whoever was holding it is going to be held responsible for whatever happens to come out of that barrel.
So, again, that sort of lays some culpability right to Alec Baldwin. Yeah. Look, we already know the armorer was sentenced to 18 months in prison. She's already been convicted for criminally negligent homicide. All right. So she's already been shown negligent. Who now, David Halls, who the armorer handed the gun to, he pled guilty also. and he was given, I think, a 6-month suspended sentence. Now, the person who pulled the trigger is on trial. And as much as they play that George Snuffleupagus interview of, oh, no, I didn't pull the trigger, science and investigators have proven that he absolutely did pull that trigger. Mike.
Yeah, Billy, no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And the strange thing was, I was always under the impression that they used fake firearms and, and blanks, that they didn't use a real, that's a 45 caliber Pieta Italian-made revolver that's made to look like one of those old Westerns, like John Wayne, 44 caliber or 45 caliber guns in the Old West. That's a 45 slug, a real slug. It went through Souza, and then it hit Hutchins.
No, it's the other way around, Mike.
Hutchins and Souza. Thank you. Yeah, yes. Right through Hutchins and then into Souza. I mean, you could, but by the grace of God, Souza did not pass away either. There's an old adage in law, and it's called in negligence law. It's called res ipsa loquitur. That's Latin for it speaks for itself. If something happens, like say a plane falls out of the sky, they're not supposed to do that. The fact that a plane falls out of the sky, that in itself, we understand was caused by negligence. When this kind of thing happens and someone is shot and killed on a set or seriously injured on a set, there's absolutely, it's the injury speaks for itself. It wouldn't have happened except for some sort of negligence. And being the fact that Baldwin hired everybody, he was the boss of the set. He was running everything. He can't really escape in any way, shape, or form his responsibility. He was in charge of the whole thing, and therefore he has some level of criminal responsibility for the set that he created. It's his set. And the fact that someone died, that shows that it's negligence per se. It would not have happened. You would not have had a death without negligence occurring. So he's got a long way. As Phil said, he's got a long way to go.
Phil, besides the fact that Alec Baldwin undoubtedly pulled the trigger, we know that. That's been proven. He was also a producer who was responsible for safety on that set. And he totally poo-poos that, oh, no, I had nothing to do with that. Dude, you're a producer. You have everything to do with that. If you're going to wear that producer's hat and then something bad happens, you can't shirk your responsibilities and say, no, let me throw this producer hat away because I had nothing to do with that. Phil.
Yeah. Excuse me, Billy, on the in the industry, when you're an on-location producer, I wrote this down, you have an added responsibility and a duty to protect the safety of the crew. I think with that statement right there, that puts it in a nutshell. He could say whatever he wants. He was the on-site producer, and the responsibility will lay at his feet for safety on the set. They were running fast and loose with safety regulations in the days prior. People had walked off the set that were working on the set that weren't getting paid in different reasons. They were actually using that firearm to take target practice. Big time no-no that there were live rounds on the set, with a gun that is a real gun. Like Mike said, he wasn't sure if they used real guns. Yes, sometimes they do use real guns, but they have specific rounds. And even if it's pointed in the direction of where the person that's filming, the camera person, the cameraman, they put up a piece of plexiglass in between that firearm and the camera person, because even with a blank, there could be residue, gunpowder residue, or different, maybe a little bit of wax that holds the gunpowder in place. That can become a projectile that might not be deadly, but you won't want to get hit with it. God forbid you get hit in the eye. So they put up a piece of plexiglass. All of these safety protocols were not followed. The standards were not met. And I think it's all going to fall right at the feet of Alec Baldwin, and he's going to have to answer for this.
Absolutely. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime, true crime from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, ring that bell. If you want to contribute to us financially, we have a Patreon with 4 different levels. We also have a YouTube channel membership with, count them, 5 different levels. and our YouTube channel members has been growing by leaps and bounds, all because of you guys. We thank you for all of that. Mike, one of the things I'm seeing suggested, and I can't believe it's even being suggested, is that Alec Baldwin should testify. I think that is a mistake in 99.9% of the time for a defendant to testify on his or her behalf. Your thoughts?
Billy, I think he's going to want to. If I'm his attorney, I'm going to say, don't. He's not. I don't think he has it in him. He's going to say something that's going to be probably a little bit off the wall, and you don't want those statements, because if he gets on the stand, then all of his previous statements about this case automatically become relevant when the prosecutor stands up and cross-examines him at the end of the trial. So, if he says, I just can't believe that that I can't did it. I didn't do it. The gun was damaged or whatever. And then, you bring in this, and then after that's all done, you get the prosecutor in there showing the video saying, okay, as the commentator said, which is the lie, which is the truth, in which statement to Stephanopoulos were you acting or lying? Or here, are you acting or lying? Are you telling the truth now in front of this jury? I don't think he'll score points with the jury. I don't see it. I don't think with his personality. I think you're right. I think he would actually damage himself more. It's up to him in the final call. But if I'm his attorney, I really wouldn't want him testifying. No way.
No, I think that would be a huge mistake. Let me play a little bit of this of what the trial is going to probably look like.
Be very, very crucial that his legal team prepare him if he does decide to take the stand.
The interview Ohorian referred to has now become synonymous with the case against Baldwin. Just months after the shooting, he appeared on Good Morning America with George Stephanopoulos, and Baldwin claimed he never pulled the trigger.
It wasn't in the script for the trigger to be pulled.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them, never.
And it seems like all roads lead back to that Good Morning America interview that you referenced, where he said he never pulled the trigger. And we saw in Hannah Gutierrez-Reed's trial that experts actually testified and said the trigger had to have been pulled in order for the gun to go off. So is it possible if Baldwin takes the stand that he kind of recants what he said on Good Morning America?
I think it's possible that he might either clarify or attribute some of the inconsistencies to either shock or remembering things wrong. I mean, he was interviewed just after it had happened. We saw some footage of him being very distressed. It's understandably very upsetting and distressing and shocking for someone to, anytime, you take someone's life, and especially in that circumstance where he had no reason to believe that the gun had a live round in it. He's been an actor for decades. He's worked with guns for decades. Obviously, something like this has never happened. So I think that, it's not uncommon for some statements that are made. I'll say even, I had a car accident the other day and I was trying to remember some things that happened, and I might have been off with some things. And then if I think about it later, maybe it was, that this had happened or that had happened a little bit differently than I remember. So I think it's normal that in the shock of that. But when you have these sort of grand denials, I think that's where he might get into some trouble.
When it comes to the question of whether Baldwin will take the stand, Ohorian says there are several factors to consider. And leading up to the trial, I'm sure that Baldwin's team is really prepping this, obviously together, doing their research, but talking to their client too. So when they're heading into this trial, they're likely going through the pros and cons of him taking the stand. What do you think those might be?
Yeah, I think, like we talked about, the pros are going to be he can address some of those inconsistencies. And again, perhaps finding, reasons why there might have been some inconsistencies, either respect.
Mike, I don't agree with her one bit. First of all, if he takes the stand, can't the prosecution also bring in some of his prior past run-ins with law enforcement? And
Yeah. Sure.
So that's bad news in itself. It shows that he's a person with a short fuse. which
but
is
would there be relevance with that, Billy? I don't know if there would be. I don't know if a judge would allow that. I mean, there might. It
Up
might
to
not
the
be.
judge.
It's kind of prejudicial to the witness, I would think, if it had relevance to. This is not like he got into an argument with somebody. This was obviously a reckless shooting, but I don't know if that would make it past the judge, Mike. What do you think?
If it is, like, say, for instance, he got a disorderly conduct summons when he was 19, no, definitely not. But
Right.
if he got into any sort of aggressive behavior, an altercation with somebody, that sort of thing, or if there was any other convictions that showed any sort of recklessness, like driving drunk, things like that. If he has anything like that on his record that can show a state of mind that is similar to the state of mind that he's being charged with, in this case, negligence, recklessness, then it would become relevant. But
He's got into public confrontations with reporters and such. I don't think stuff like that.
Probably not.
Yeah, I don't see that coming into the case. But I mean,
criminal conviction.
Yeah, there's a lot here that's going to come into this case, 100%. And I don't think that.
One of the things that I wanted to sort of point out is that if he has a short fuse in dealing with day-to-day life, how well would he do on the stand where some sharp prosecutor will be hitting him with questions that he will not like? Will his short fuse blow up, and will he blow up? And that will blow up his whole testimony.
That's probably a good reason why his attorney probably wouldn't let him testify. I think it would be very, very dangerous for him to get on the stand based on that interview that he did. And it wouldn't surprise me if in the future, if law schools will play that videotape and say, have your client never speak. And this is a reason why. Look at this videotape that Alec Baldwin did and play it. I mean, he's making very definitive assertions about what happened, that he didn't pull the trigger. He's saying it with conviction. And you're going to have an expert that's going to testify the only way the gun could have gone off was by pulling the trigger. Now, did he intentionally pull the trigger? Perhaps he was drawing it. His gun hit the trigger and it went off. He should not have made any statement about it prior to this. And a lot of maneuvering was done. A lot of maneuvering. He maneuvered with the husband, Matt Hutchins, and settled at an out-of-court settlement. And he was actually given a producer credit on the film that was actually finished. So he did a lot of maneuvering. He thought that this interview with George Stephanopoulos was probably set up by his publicist, that he was going to get out in front of it. And I think that's what the original intent was. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's going to be the case.
You know, Phil, getting out in front of a case like this shouldn't even be in your vocabulary.
Of
getting
course
out in front of it, and your advice of your attorney would be to shut your mouth. That is how you get out in front of this. You don't get out in front of it. That term is from Chris Cuomo from News Nation. Get out in front of it. No, you don't do that. You shut your mouth, because now he's got to live with all the things that he said. Look, it's clear many people do not like Alec Baldwin, but that should have nothing to do with this trial. This trial is about criminal negligence. It's about criminal negligence and taking accountability as to what occurred. And that, in a nutshell, is what the whole trial is and should be about. Now, his past conduct, if he in fact gets convicted, then that could be problematic. Yeah, then this judge could say, you're doing every bit of 18 months because you have no remorse. You took no responsibility. That could hurt him in that vein. But as far as the jury, they should be looking at criminally negligent homicide. Mike.
Yeah, Billy, when they're going to see all the video from the actual that was left over from that morning when they were doing the practicing, he did a cross draw maneuver, and I believe he actually cocked the hammer. So, and we've shot 38s, and when you cock the hammer, you need very, very little pressure, maybe 2 pounds of pressure, not even, and the gun will release the hammer. The trigger will release the hammer. The gun will go off. So perhaps in his mind, he didn't realize what he was doing, or didn't realize the consequences of actually the difference between pulling a firearm, the trigger, and all the pressure it needs, or cocking the hammer, and then the difference, because he has very little or to no experience with probably real firearms, and therefore, he didn't really understand the dynamics of what was going on. But it's a really simple fact, circumstances for the jury. And other than his status as an A1 actor and this crazy stuff that he said in public, this is a real simple set of facts. And I hope the jury does not get swayed by the fact that of who he actually is. It could be Joe Schmo sitting there. This could have occurred, say, in some summer stock production of some drama, and then you wouldn't even know who these people were. It's all because of the fact that he's an A-list actor, and he's got he probably has an excellent defense team that's probably worth a lot more than anyone else could afford. But other than that, real simple, real basic ideas in this case, and I hope the jury analyzes it without thinking about who he actually is.
Phil, Mike brought up a good point, and when a gun is cocked, it needs about 2 pounds of pressure to go off. You and I and Professor Mike, as New York City cops, we've probably stopped hundreds of people in the street at gunpoint. At gunpoint.
Absolutely.
And Phil, where was your finger when you stopped them at gunpoint?
Was not on the trigger, was on the
100%, and people don't understand that. My finger was on the side of the trigger guard.
Right.
If I was getting shot at, that's a different point of view. My finger's on the trigger. But if I stop someone on the street, there's no way my finger's on that trigger, because you could just get startled and accidentally shoot somebody. That's how easy it is to fire a gun, especially a Glock 19 goes into single action after the first shot is fired.
Billy, the other thing is we get that drilled into our heads, not only because of the things that you just stated. Suppose you're stopping somebody, you got your finger on the trigger, and you trip and fall. Your instincts are going to be to try and grab onto something. You're going to, accidental discharge. You're going to pull the trigger. So we're trained to keep our finger off the trigger until you're about to engage with a gunfight, a gun battle that you're going to fire the gun. So I think that, based on his public perception prior to this incident, that's probably why they did that interview. His perception was very bad. He was nasty. He was rude with reporters. There was several instances where he was given a ticket for harassment in the past in New York City. So I think that interview was done to try and come out, oh, look at his perception, look at his public perception. He's really not as bad as everybody thinks he is. But he put his foot in his mouth by making those very, very convicted statements about not pulling the trigger.
Yeah, well, I think what we all said is that this goes down to criminal negligence.
Fans, of course, right? So I think it's possible to get jurors who don't really feel one way or another about Alec Baldwin in particular, but I think it'll be harder to sort of parse out emotions people might have about celebrities, such as, for example, they believe they're above the law, or actually putting them on a pedestal.
When it comes time to arguments and testimony, we have an idea of what angle each side may take. The prosecution alleges Baldwin is guilty of involuntary manslaughter following a history of negligence on the set. Before the deadly shooting, there had been 2 accidental firings of blank rounds, and several crew members had already resigned out of safety concerns. Prosecutors will also probably point to Baldwin's Good Morning America interview when he claims the trigger was never pulled. As we saw in the state's case against Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, experts say the trigger had to have been pulled for the weapon to fire at all.
Now, we understand from previous testimony that you sent the gun that was being used by Mr. Baldwin to the FBI for testing. Is that correct?
Yes, we did.
And prior to the testing being done with the mallet, were you notified that testing could potentially result in damage to the gun?
Yes.
And what was the reason that you proceeded with the testing anyway?
We proceeded with the testing because Mr. Baldwin had made statements that he didn't pull the trigger, and I think his exact statement was that the gun just went off. So we needed to figure out how to disprove that theory. Or that statement, and that was the way that was proposed to us and what the FBI could do.
We're not entirely sure what the defense has up their sleeves, but experts theorize that Baldwin's attorneys will highlight the difference between a movie set and real life. When Baldwin was handed the gun, First Assistant Director David Halls said it was cold, meaning it wasn't loaded. Halls was later charged and pleaded no contest to negligent use of a deadly weapon. So as it turned out, the weapon Halls handed Baldwin had a live round inside, and that's what led to the deadly shooting. But Baldwin's team will probably say he believed the gun was safe. Those are arguments we could expect, but Ohorian says it's possible other areas of Baldwin's life are also included. Really zeroing in on the celebrity factor, do you think that's something that the defense or the prosecution might bring up? Baldwin's history with the law, his status as a celebrity, his past history in movies and TV, is any of that relevant?
Well, on the one hand, if they feel like it's an elephant in the room, I think that, it might be worthwhile to sort of address the idea of acting, or, whether he's acting or whether he's, has years of training behind him and how that might affect his testimony. But again, I really think that's something that should be handled in voir dire. With respect to his acting itself, the fact that he's an actor and his experience, decades of experience, is absolutely relevant. So we would expect that to be brought up and addressed. This is somebody who has worked on other sets that have guns before, right? So he should know how to handle guns. On the one hand, from the defense perspective, he should never have anticipated that there was a live round. So he should have been able to rely on the safety of the set. From the prosecutor's perspective, this is an actor who understands what sets are like, understands that there's gun safety, that there's training, and he should have done the safety training. He should have, checked and double-checked the gun. So there's both sides of that, but his experience as an actor, irrespective of his training, professional training with respect to his skill, is entirely relevant in this circumstance.
It also seems as though prosecutors are going to highlight the acting portion of things, but additionally the fact that he was a producer on the movie. So maybe it's not necessarily the responsibility of an actor to make sure that the gun is 100% safe, but potentially it is the responsibility of the producer to make sure that everything would be safe on the set, because they're kind of overseeing everything and making sure that nothing could go wrong.
I think she hit that on the head because, he's wearing two hats here. He is an actor on this set, but he's also a producer who apparently didn't attend the safety training that was given by the staff here. A producer who allowed Hannah Gutierrez-Reed to be hired as an unqualified armorer because they were trying to cut costs. A producer who was trying to cut costs at every stage that made this an unsafe set. So all of those things can absolutely be brought up by the prosecutor. And one of the things we all know here, through living with firearms for 40 years, most of us, we still have guns, right? All of us?
Yes.
We still,
yes.
27 years of my police career, 13 years as a civilian. That's 40 years I've been living with a firearm. I've never, ever had an accidental discharge. And I live with a gun and you live with a gun. And one of the things I always found when you live with a gun was to always do things the exact same way every time so there can be no mistake. You go wherever you go, you take out the in a semi-automatic, you take out the magazine, then you slide the slide back to eject the round, and then you put it wherever you put it, lock it. You lock it in a safe or lock it wherever you do. And you do that the same way every time. And that way, you're not leaving your gun hanging around so a young child can get a hold of it. You're making it safe for yourself also. Phil.
Absolutely, Billy. I think that all the years of training that we went through puts that kind of that mental state that, this is a firearm, it's dangerous, and it needs to be maintained in a safe and secure way. And like you said, you're going to, on an automatic, you're going to take the clip out and you're going to hit the slide a few times. Even though one round pops out, you're going to hit a few times. And like you always say, Bill, physical and visual inspection, make sure that thing isn't loaded. And then maybe you sit down to clean it or put it away, whatever you're going to do with it. So if you follow these protocols and it's always pointed in the safe safe direction, whether it's loaded or unloaded. That's the thing that they always drilled through your brains, that if you do make a mistake, and God forbid there is a round in the chamber, if it's in a safe direction may be down, it may be up, whatever the safe direction is, away from, obviously, from any humans. You're not going to have this type of a situation where an accidental discharge goes off and, you know, someone is killed and injured. In this particular case, I mean, the fact that these rounds were even on that set, that's just so mind-boggling. This, if there were no live rounds on that set, and that's really the question of the day, how'd they get there? Hannah Gutierrez Reed would be alive, and there would be no trial for Alec Baldwin. It's terrible.
Oh, you mean Halyna Hutchins would be alive?
Yes, I'm sorry, Halyna Hutchins. And I think there needs to be justice for this woman. Now, is justice going to be him going to jail for 20 years? I don't think that that's justice. I think that him having either a felony conviction and maybe a suspended sentence, something of that nature. But it just cannot go unchecked. This is something that should not have happened. And I think it needs to set the standard for the future for other productions. And there have been many actors that came and spoke out against this. That,
Phil, I was just going to say that a very prominent actor, and I won't say his name, he said that he always has the armorer demonstrate in front of him that the gun has the proper dummy rounds in it. And he checks it and shows it to him in front of him. And then he's satisfied that the gun is safe. But to rely, I remember I used to have a commanding officer, and he would ask me a question. And he would say, "Who told you that?" I would say, "Officer so and so." And he would say, "Would you state your career? Would you stake your career on that guy?" And I go, "No, I guess you're right. I wouldn't." But it's the same sort of question. Oh, David Halls told you it was a cold gun. Would you stake your life on that now? Because now his life is on trial now because he trusted someone that did something. Maybe David Halls wasn't unprofessional. That day he was. He didn't do something professional. He violated protocols. He violated safety. And the armorer, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, was even worse than he was. Mike.
Billy, yeah. Just think about it. Just think about you and me and Phil. How many times on patrol we pulled our firearm out and pointed at someone? Probably, each of us, probably several hundred times without a single malfunction, without a single accidental discharge.
Numerous times a tour, Mike. Numerous times a tour. When you're in a busy precinct.
Oh, yeah. You go in a busy precinct, you might be 4, 5, 6, 8 times a tour, depending on if it's a hot Friday night, hot Saturday night in summertime. So you do this. And and we're dealing with when you're 21, 22, 23 years old, coming on the job. The NYPD has the training that can turn a civilian into a police officer in 6 months and put the protocols, as you say, in your mind. Repetition, 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 repetition. Alec Baldwin cannot escape from the fact that he created this, the behavior on the set, on the movie set, because he is producer. He can't get rid of that hat. He has to wear it. He has to own it. And no matter what he was thinking in his mind about what he was doing at the time that he was drawing and putting his gun back in the holster and stuff, that sort of stuff, the recklessness did not begin there. The recklessness began already when the set was being run recklessly. And that, from being run recklessly, led to that accidental discharge and the killing of Halyna Hutchins and Joel Souza. And that's something that he cannot escape no matter how he tries to dance around it.
Mike, the NYPD firearms range in Rodman's Neck has had thousands and thousands of cops come through that range over, I don't know how many years it's been in operation, 100 years, I don't know. And they've never had someone shot. They've had a bullet hit the stanchion and ricochets, but they've never had an accident, which is incredible. And that's not by accident. That is because the safety protocols they put in place do not allow for accidents, do not allow for criminal negligence, do not allow for people doing stupid things, because they're told what is expected of them. And if they don't comply, they're pulled off the line.
You know, Billy, I'd like to play devil's advocate for a minute. You know, his defense attorney may come out and say things like, well, my client is not responsible for this when you had an armorer on set who's now doing jail time. And the assistant director called out cold gun. So what was my client's responsibility? My client says he didn't pull the trigger. Perhaps the gun malfunctioned. We don't know if the gun could even be examined at this point because it was damaged by the FBI. So with all of those things being said, and believe me, they'll stress a lot of those points that I just made, that little bit of doubt, there could be, and we don't want to see that, there could be an acquittal or there could be a hung jury because they're going to put on a strong defense. I'm sure of it. And like they did in the Gutierrez case, they pointed the finger at other people. So I think they're going to take that same position. Alec Baldwin is not guilty of involuntary manslaughter. He was told it was a cold gun. The rounds weren't put in the gun by Alec Baldwin. They were put in the gun by Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, who's now serving 18 months in jail. So all of those things are going to be pretty powerful.
Something? What comes to my mind after you saying that is what I learned when I was in first grade. If he told you to jump off the Brooklyn Bridge, would you do it?
Good point.
And Alec Baldwin was told it was a cold gun. Should he have believed it?
Well, there's an actor in Hollywood that you didn't mention his name that said just that even though I'm told this is a cold gun and this is a high profile actor, I still check it. So that was his responsibility. The fact that
there were two of them, and one of them was what's his name? The guy, George Clooney.
Clooney.
One of them was George Clooney. I can say his name because he went public with it.
Yeah,
and he went public. Said no, I always check the gun, or I have the person check it in front of me. So
they show him what's inside. When you're using a real firearm, that's and all the actors have to go through that safety course. They all do. And listen, bottom line is we know he didn't intentionally try to hurt this woman. It was an accident, obviously, but to go out and do all the maneuvering that he did and say, I never pulled the trigger and all of that. It's just, it's like a slap in the face to the family. I think that's how I feel about it.
Leif Grahamson, should real guns be in movies at all?
Good point.
That's a good point right now. And I think that they're going to get to the point perhaps from this movie that perhaps there won't be real guns in movies anymore. And from what I understand, they don't need to use a real gun. They can just put the sound and everything in after the fact. But I think it helps the actor and the actors, react to the sound and everything when it's done live.
Billy, in New York, when we had Steve Gardell on, Sergeant Steve Gardell, that was from the movie TV unit, we had him on in the past. In New York, they do use a real firearm. However, there's lead put into the barrel that would prevent a projectile from traveling through that barrel. So they use, even though they're using a dummy round that'll just make it'll discharge a flash and make a sound. There's no way that a projectile can travel through that barrel. That's the standard that should be all throughout the country for any production. No way can this firearm that we're going to play with, because that's what they're doing, they're acting, should be able to fire a projectile. That should be the standard across the country, period, end of story.
100%. I want to play a little bit of this. This is the judge from the case and why she made her rulings.
After Alec Baldwin said this.
It wasn't in the script for the trigger to be pulled.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger. Never.
FBI firearms examiner Bryce Ziegler testified about the testing that he conducted.
And how many times did you test fire this revolver?
I test fired this particular one 12 times.
And during each one of those 12 times, did you observe any of these issues that you just mentioned that would cause you concern that maybe this gun could malfunction?
No, there was nothing odd or abnormal about this during the initial test fire.
And when you did the test firing, did you check the different hammer cocking positions?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And at any point during each one of those 12 test fires, did the gun discharge by itself without a pull of the trigger?
No.
Now, there was testimony at a recent hearing that the FBI and the sheriff's office were aware that the accidental discharge testing could destroy the weapon, but they didn't notify the defense. Ziegler testified about the testing that he conducted.
And how did you conduct this trigger pull test?
So essentially, if you picture a wire coat hanger, so I have a long wire with a hook on the top, and I would orient the firearm vertically, so the muzzle would be pointing straight up at the ceiling. I would hook this, essentially the coat hanger portion of the hook inside the trigger guard, resting on the trigger, and then I kind of add static weights to the bottom of that wire. And so I can continue to add weights until I reach the point where it's starting to pull the trigger as I pick up on the firearm. So the amount of weight that's added, that's going to be the amount of force that's required to pull the trigger.
And what amount of force was required to pull the trigger for this evidence revolver?
So in my note taking and during my exam, I measured that amount of force to be between 2 and 2.5 pounds.
It's not a lot.
And what does that mean?
Can you elaborate?
Well, does it mean that it would take 2 to 2.5 pounds of force to pull that trigger?
Somewhere in between those values, yes.
Would that be considered what people call a hair trigger?
I personally would not consider that to be a hair trigger. When I think of a hair trigger, I think of either very high performance hunting rifles, things of that nature, where the amount of force on the trigger, I don't have a specific number for you, but it's extremely light, where you just barely have to touch the trigger to fire the firearm. It's typically, you see them in hunting rifles.
Now, Ziegler testified that he actually struck the gun on 6 planes with a rawhide mallet. He was cross-examined by Alec Baldwin's defense attorney.
Is it possible to know just by physically looking at a gun whether or not it's capable of malfunctioning?
I would say no.
And even if you've test fired in your laboratory into the little water bucket a bunch of times in that sort of stabilized environment, just because that works and there's not a catastrophic explosion of the gun or something like that, that doesn't mean that it's impossible that there's a malfunction, does it?
That's correct. I can only tell you that it functioned normally during my testing.
And you didn't, at that point, before you went into the accidental testing that led to the destruction of the firearm, you didn't disassemble and look at the inside of the gun, did you?
No, at that point, there was no reason for me to do so.
Well, nobody asked you to.
That's correct, but I also did not see anything that would give me cause to do so.
And not only did you not disassemble it, but you obviously didn't disassemble it and take photographs or video of the inside, true?
Prior to the accidental discharge testing?
Right.
That's correct. I did not do that.
A firearms expert for the state had testified at a recent hearing about his thoughts on whether that accidental discharge testing was actually necessary.
Mr. Haig, just to orient the court, you agree that the testing that the FBI and Mr. Ziegler did, the destructive accidental testing, was unnecessary in light of the circumstances of this case, correct?
I would view it as unnecessary given the context of the case.
Now, the prosecution contends there was really no prejudice to Alec Baldwin, in part because the gun appeared to be in fine working order before the testing occurred.
Her testimony from Officer Hancock, Corporal Hancock, who said this gun appeared perfectly fine. There seemed to be nothing wrong with it. You heard from Mr. Ziegler. When he received it at the FBI, the gun fired 12 times, just as designed. There was nothing apparently wrong with this gun. So the defense now comes and argues that this accidental discharge testing that led to the damage of some of these components deprived the defendant of this exculpatory evidence. Well, that's not the way the test works. The mere possibility that this destroyed evidence could have been tested, could have exculpated the defendant, is not sufficient to satisfy the first prong of Trombetta.
The defense summed up its argument about why they believed Baldwin had been prejudiced. They had no ability to examine the gun before it was destroyed.
So no one's accusing anybody of ethical misconduct on this one. That's at least not necessary for the legal test. What it means is that they had an awareness that this was potentially exculpatory And instead of stopping and saying, well, what do we need to do here? Do we need to document this? Do we need to preserve this? They just went ahead and destroyed it.
Judge Mary Marlowe Summer denied Baldwin's latest motion to dismiss, where he argued he was prejudiced because the revolver was destroyed during testing to see whether the gun could accidentally fire on its own. In the end, Judge Marlowe Summer said it would be up to the jury to decide what weight to give the gun being destroyed. She wrote, given the court's above assessment of materiality and prejudice, the court concludes that the state must fully disclose the destructive nature of firearm testing, the resulting loss and its relevance and import to the jury. The state must examine appropriate witnesses in such a manner as to achieve this disclosure. In addition, defendant remains entitled to cross-examination of the state's witnesses to further accomplish this remedy. Alec Baldwin was holding that Colt .45 revolver on October 21st, 2021 at the Bonanza Creek Ranch. Baldwin was practicing drawing the gun as cinematographer Halyna Hutchins and director Joel Souza set up for filming a scene. I want to take a quick second to tell you about...
Okay, so, I think that judge... She ruled on it, and she's going to allow the gun to come in as evidence and the tests they did, Mike, to be proper, and that she'll give the defense a chance to challenge that, but she's not throwing it out. That's how I received it. Is that how you did?
Yeah. It's it'll be up to the jury because the jury is always the trier of fact. They determine what in their deliberations what the actual facts are as they come to their conclusion about guilt or innocence. And the Baldwin does not, defense team does not win the request to vacate the indictment and throw the whole case out. But at trial, they will get to cross-examine all the witnesses about what they did, why they did it, was this test necessary, why did you have to hit it with a mallet, what was the relevance of that? The FBI is trying to, but it's very relevant why they did it. I'm sorry that they damaged it, but they're going to get their day in court. They're going to get their run at the prosecution's witnesses, and they'll be able to do whatever damage they want to the prosecution's case. And the judge is saying, in the end, the prosecutor is going to present their case. The defense is going to present their case on the issue of the damaged gun. And it'll be up to the jury to give it weight, whether or not they give it a lot of weight or a little weight, or they go, oh my God, the FBI destroyed it. Poor Alex. He doesn't get a fair trial. It's all up to the jury. The judge is like, it's coming in. We're going to talk about it in front of the jury. The jury's going to be able to deliberate, and that's it. That's what we have, Mr. Baldwin. Move on. We're going to trial.
Absolutely. Schmitty, thank you for the $5 super sticker. I cannot wait to see you cover more of this. Thank you, Sergeant Bill, Detective Philly G, and Professor Geary. I'm so into this one. Love the discussion. Schmitty, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Phil, the case goes on trial this Tuesday. It starts Tuesday, July 9th. Again, in a summation, I'm just going to say the two words is criminal negligence. And no matter what you feel, it doesn't matter what you feel about Alec Baldwin, whether you like him, you hate him, you love him, whatever, it doesn't matter. What they're going to try to prove is that he and the rust set, and he in his role as a producer, and let's forget that he was an actor, that he was criminally negligent because he wore two hats on that set. One was the hat of an actor, and the other was the hat of a producer. And in that way, they're going to have to try to prove criminal negligence. Phil, your final thoughts.
Billy, the testing of the gun where they took a mallet and they smashed it, I only hope they videotaped it. I don't think they did, but I think that will bolster the contention by the prosecution that this gun couldn't have just gone off. They had that gun on a table, and they were hitting it with a mallet with such force that they actually broke the gun, but it didn't fire. So the contention, I think, will be bolstered that this gun didn't accidentally go off. This gun went off because the trigger was pulled. In my closing words, I'd just like to say, keeping Halyna Hutchins and her family in our thoughts and prayers. She deserves justice in this case. whatever the justice is going to be, the jury's going to have to figure that out. Let's just hope and pray that everyone that's on that jury can take their personal feelings, whether they be pro or against Alec Baldwin, that they can just look at the evidence. Like you said, this was reckless in nature. I don't think it's going to be that hard to come to a conclusion based on the evidence that we know is going to produce that trial. So let's just hope and pray for justice for this woman, and thoughts and prayers for her and her family.
Absolutely. Mike, your final words.
Yeah, just pray for Halyna Hutchinson's family and Hutchins' family, and they're the victims here. And I think the jury, it could go either way because of his celebrity status. You never know. But if justice is done, then he probably will be convicted. But you don't know. You just have no idea in these cases. But let's just keep remember, as Phil said, who's the victim here? It's Halyna Hutchins, and that's the person you should pray for.
Absolutely. Folks, I'm Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. We'll be following up on this case on Tuesday. Have a great 4th of July weekend, and we'll see you next time.
Happy Independence Day, everyone. God
Absolutely.
bless.
One episode just ain't enough.